Alrighty, guys, so I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's live stream. Give me just 1 second. It took me a little bit to get everything going because of technical issues. So let me pull up my presentation here. I apologize. Here we are. For some reason, it was just a big delay when I was trying to get going, so I apologize about that. But we're still going to do our thing and get this going. So again, guys, what we're going to be talking about today is, of course, on the recovery plate, and I'll explain in detail what that means as we're going into this particular topic. So, again, guys, before I do sort of get started here with talking about this topic, I do want to mention my website, which is bponlinefitness.com. There's a ton of information that you can check out on there as it relates to online fitness coaching, as well as checking out some of the free resources that I have on there. Of course, I do have a blog that I upload to. I have an email list that you can sign up to. And there's a ton of free resources that you can check out on there that can really give you insight on various topics related to fitness, nutrition, and recovery. Another thing too is that if you miss any of these live streams, they do get archived to YouTube. So just know that you can watch them at a later time. Another thing too is that I usually upload the latest live stream on the homepage on my website, so you can check that out there as well. Each and every week, I usually change that so that it reflects the newest stream. One last thing I do want to mention as we're sort of getting started here, that I do have a TikTok that I've been doing streams on every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you're interested in checking that out, feel free to follow me on there at Brandon SP Fit. You can check that out there. But I do various topics on there, and mostly I try to focus on more beginner geared topics on there, but I do a wide variety of different topics as well on that platform. So they won't be identical. There's going to be a different topic for each platform. So let's go ahead and get started with talking about the topic of the recovery plate and why what you eat on your rest day matters more than you think. So this is a big thing that I think a lot of people really kind of neglect in a workout routine. And a lot of people really don't emphasize the importance of your recovery days. The more that you have proper, sort of nutrition in those recovery days is going to make a difference in sort of the results that you're going to see from workouts. So these are some of the topics that we're going to discuss. It's not the entirety of what we're going to discuss. We'll touch a little bit on beyond these topics, but this is sort of just an overview on some of the topics. We're going to go over why rest day nutrition isn't optional, going over the recovery plate blueprint, protein repair, carbs as recovery fuel, and healthy fats for hormone support and inflammation balance. So, as you're noticing here, we're going to be talking a lot about macronutrients. That's a key part when it comes to recovery, not only in our normal workout days, but also in the days where we're doing, where we're taking time to sort of rest and recover, whether that be active recovery or complete recovery. So I just want to mention that these are all of what we're going to be discussing as we get going here. So the first point I want to go over is why rest day nutrition isn't optional. So muscle growth happens after you train and not during workouts. So a lot of people really focus solely on the workouts, which is a great thing. Of course, the workouts are going to get you the results. However, you do have to keep in mind how you approach those workouts is going to really factor in, alongside your nutrition in order to help, like basically those two elements kind of have to complement each other. Your workouts and your nutrition have to be complemented with each other in order for the results to reflect upon them. The same can be said for recovery. Like I've mentioned before, there's basically three pillars that you have to balance in order to reach your goal. And depending on what you focus on in those pillars is going to change depending on the goal. However, what it takes is balancing those properly based on your specific goals. So, of course, that's your fitness side of things, your workouts, your nutrition, as well as your recovery and how you recover post workout. So, all of those different factors are going to play into, the results that you're going to get. And rest days are an important part of that. Rest days, however, are not days that you completely, you know, don't stay in your routine in some form. Your nutrition should still be in check even on your rest days. It's not something that that you can just, go about like you normally would before. You still have to make sure that your nutrition aligns with your goals regardless. So rest days are when your body repairs micro tears, it rebuilds muscle fibers and increases strength. So without fuel, this process slows down. Your body can't rebuild what it doesn't have resources for. So, like I mentioned, when it comes to fitness and nutrition complementing each other, a big part of that, especially when we're focusing on muscle gain and hypertrophy, is that a lot of people sort of neglect the nutrition side of things and they don't understand, especially with muscle gain, you have to have an adequate amount, especially like when we're talking about protein, as well as carbs in particular. So you have to have an adequate amount of specific nutrients that are going to help aid in that muscle repair process. If you are lacking, in your calorie intake and your macronutrients, even if you're working out hard, it's not going to translate to results. That's like what I'm saying with those three pillars. You have to balance those. If they're not balanced, then everything's going to fall apart. So, how you approach nutrition is important. Even when we're talking about rest days, your rest days still need to complement the goal that you're working towards. So, glycogen refills on rest days. Glycogen is known as an energy source in the body. So, when you see that, just know that glycogen is mostly found, you can replenish glycogen in different ways. Usually carbs help with that, but it's basically an energy source in the body so that it's not, confusing to understand what that term means. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about glycogen. So it's your training fuel tank. So your muscles refill glycogen between sessions. So again, think of it as an energy source. So they don't refill during them, but in between those sessions. If you undereat on rest days, tomorrow's workout will feel heavy. So it could also feel flat and low energy. So this in turn is going to lead to weaker performance and less hypertrophy. So again, this goes into the same aspect that you have to complement your nutrition no matter what. Now, it's what I do want to mention here is that it's okay to, go off of like like when people say cheat meals or, anything to that effect. It's okay from time to time to do that. Like it's not a bad thing that you have meals that go outside of your nutrition. If your nutrition, one thing I like to mention with clients is if your nutrition is already pretty much zeroed in and you're consistent with it, even if you have days where you're kind of off on your nutrition and you're not, like say for example, like with holidays, like stuff like that. If you're consistent with your nutrition, it's not going to really make that big of an impact. Where it becomes a problem is if your nutrition isn't consistent with your goals that you're working towards and your workouts. So it has to complement each other for the most part. So I just want to mention that it's okay. You don't have to have everything like all the time correct. I mean, we're humans, so it's totally fine to sort of be outside of that routine from time to time. What matters is that you stay consistent as much as possible with how you approach your nutrition. So if you do have rest days or maybe you go a little bit off your nutrition, that's fine. But what you need to think about is getting back into that routine after you sort of have those days where you got away from your nutrition. So I do want to clarify there, especially when we're talking about this topic, that it's not entirely about getting everything correct all the time because you're not. There's going to be days where everything is kind of lopsided. I mean, that could be like you could have bad workout days. You could have bad days where your nutrition kind of falls apart. You could have days like with recovery, like you're not sleeping as well. All of those factors are going to happen at some point in your journey. It's how you pick yourself back up from those that's going to lead to that progression, is what I want to say. So, continuing on here with rest day nutrition. So, hormones and inflammation need proper nutrition to recover. So, balanced meals, of course, are going to stabilize cortisol. I've talked about cortisol multiple times, but what cortisol is known as a stress hormone in the body. So the way that this is increased can be a lot of different ways. Of course, stress can increase it. If you lack sleep at all, it could also increase. And what cortisol does is when it's increased, it's not good to have it at a high level. So when it's increased to a certain extent, it's going to sort of hinder your progress, like especially when we're talking about hypertrophy. So just know that when we're talking about cortisol, that's basically what that is a stress hormone that's in the body. So balanced meals, again, they're going to stabilize that cortisol, so it's not going to raise. But I just want you to know that that's what that is when we're talking about cortisol is a stress hormone. It's going to support testosterone, regulate insulin, and reduce chronic inflammation in the body. So it's creating a growth friendly internal environment. So skipping food disrupts these systems and stalls progress. So another thing I do want to add here is a lot of times when I've had calls with potential clients, and usually I ask about nutrition. One of the first, when I do the second call that I have with clients normally, I usually always ask a little bit about their nutrition. And one of the things that is a really good indicator on, especially if somebody is honest, that's what I always try to mention to even clients, anybody that I talk to, especially if they're wanting to work with me. It's best to be as honest as possible because the more that you can tell me, the more that you can give me is going to really help in how I can program you properly and how we can really understand what you're struggling with. So the more that I have clear, information, especially with nutrition, that's where you can sort of know how to fix those problems. But what I want to say here is that a lot of the times when different people that I've talked to and they, are interested in online coaching, the many things that I hear as far as nutrition is a lot of people don't have a consistent sort of nutrition. Like they kind of eat when they want to or eat when they feel like it, I guess I should say. And that's something that you have to avoid. If you're especially with muscle gain, you have to avoid skipping meals. You have to eat consistently in order to see results with muscle gain. This is not something that's like it's a non-negotiable. You have to have a well balanced nutrition if you're focusing on muscle gain. It's just how it works. Because if you lack, if your body is lacking adequate calorie intake, it's not, your muscles need nutrients in order to build back. If they don't have those nutrients and you're low in your calorie intake and macro intake and you don't have that protein, it's not going to lead to progression. You have to have both of those. Again, it's all about complementing one another. Yes, you could work out hard, but it's not going to mean anything if your nutrition doesn't align with that. And so that's a big thing that I notice is a lot of people they do work out a lot of times, but there's this inconsistency with nutrition. And so that's a big thing that you have to take into account. I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I wanted to mention some of these points too because how we approach nutrition is really important. So again, skipping food disrupts these systems and stalls progress. So consistency in nutrition builds momentum and habits. Rest day eating keeps your routine stable. Your body thrives on steady protein, steady carbs, steady hydration, and steady micronutrients. So inconsistency is going to lead to inconsistent results. The same sort of concept. So what I want to mention with micronutrients, if you're not aware of what micronutrients are, because I want to clarify because I know there's a lot of terms, that as far as when it relates to fitness that a lot of people may not be aware of. So micronutrients are opposite of macronutrients. So you've heard me talk about macronutrients, and those are nutrients that we get in a sort of large amount from our foods. And they're essential nutrients that really make a good bulk on how we're going to progress in our routine. So again, that's your protein, carbs, and fats. Those are macronutrients. Micronutrients are a little bit of the opposite of that. So micronutrients, the way that I always describe them is think of them in terms of vitamins, minerals. That's sort of what your micronutrients are. They are still beneficial, but you don't consume them in large amounts like you do when you're getting macronutrients. So that could be any kind of vitamin like, A, D, E, and K, vitamin B12, B, any of the B vitamins, B complex, or it could be like any kind of minerals like zinc, magnesium, any kind of those sort of nutrients are what is known as macronutrients. So any of your vitamins and minerals, that's a way that I like to make it understandable on what micronutrients are. So those aren't necessarily just because they're small doesn't mean you avoid them. They are still a part of your nutrition, but they don't make up a large chunk of your nutrition. And that's what I want to clarify why it's called macronutrients. So as we're continuing on here, what we need to go over is the recovery plate blueprint. So how should we approach the foods that we're eating on our rest days? How do we need to lay out our plate? How do we need to sort of have the proper sort of blueprint on how our nutrition is going to align with our recovery from the workouts that we've done? So, of course, what we're going to be talking about primarily here is your macronutrients. So, these are the three major components that you have to keep in mind so that you can help with aiding in that recovery process in your routine. So the first one is, of course, prioritizing lean protein. And one thing I do want to mention is I know I mentioned a lot of times with muscle gain, and the reason why I mention muscle gain is because a lot of the clients that I work with, of course, are men, and most of the time, that is the primary goal for a lot of men is muscle gain and hypertrophy. So I always gear a lot of sort of these discussions towards hypertrophy. That's not to say that with these topics that there's not, you're not going to get a benefit from these nutrients at all. So fat loss and performance-based goals are going to differ somewhat. So I just want to clarify here that what I'm primarily talking about when I'm talking about these topics is geared towards hypertrophy. If you do have questions about fat loss, or say you're focusing on more performance-based goals, feel free to let me know. But again, a lot of the times my content is more geared towards hypertrophy. So I just want to clarify that in advance that this is not a one size fits all. This is, primarily muscle gain. So we're focusing on, of course, prioritizing lean protein. This should make up roughly 30 to 40% of your plate. So to clarify what protein does is this repairs micro tears from training. So every time you do training, you're going to have tiny tears in the muscles. This happens every time you do training. It's not a bad thing. This is how the muscle is able to be repaired when you're getting those nutrients in your body. So this supports muscle protein synthesis. Again, this is known as the muscle repair process in the body. It also keeps hunger steady to prevent underfueling, so protein is going to be more filling. When you have more protein in your diet, you are going to be more full and it's going to be more filling, as far as how you feel throughout the day, like when you're going from meal to meal, you're not going to be as hungry. So an example, of course, of your lean protein is going to be chicken, primarily grilled chicken, of course. Fish, this could be salmon, this could be tuna, anything like that. Those are really really high in protein. You would think, I used to think that chicken was one of the higher, chicken and more red meats or more of your lean meats were more of the higher source of protein, but it's actually salmon and tuna. And a lot of your fish-based options, now I know a lot of people are not crazy about fish. I actually love salmon, but if you're not aware, fish has a really, really high amount of protein. It's a good protein source. And a lot of times we think of grilled chicken, we think of, our normal lean meats, but fish is one of the best options that you can choose. Eggs is another great option, of course. Greek yogurt is a great option, especially for your snacks. This is something that I always usually include in snacks between meals or sometimes with meals. Tofu and cottage cheese. So these are all good high protein sources. So when continuing on here, you also need to think about adding slow digesting carbs. And then, in other words, what we're talking about with these slow digesting carbs is your complex carbs. So, of course, there's two different types of carbs. And when we're understanding carbs, there is simple carbs and then there's complex. So, simple carbs is, of course, known as your bad carbs. That's the way that I describe them. It's your really, like when you're talking about like white bread, you're talking about pastry based items, like that's more of a simple carb. Whereas with your complex carbs, these are, of course, more slower digesting carbs. And these are carbs that are really going to benefit your recovery process because they are better quality carbs. So this replenishes glycogen. Again, glycogen is the energy source in the body. So it's going to prevent those energy crashes, keeps you fueled throughout the recovery window, and stabilizes hormone and stress responses. So keep in mind, carbs are really good to have in your diet. When you have sufficient carbs, your energy levels stay stable. If you see like a lot of people who are, kind of in a low carb diet, their energy levels are going to be down. And that's a lot of the reasons why is when you have low carb, your energy levels are just not going to be, at the same if you're not getting sufficient carbs in your diet. So again, this needs to make up 30 to 40% of your plate. So what you need to focus on, of course, is including these types of examples. So sweet potatoes, quinoa, oats, brown rice, whole grains, and legumes. So these are all options that you can include when it comes to your sort of carb options. So again, these are the more complex quality carbs in your diet. Another thing you need to think about is including healthy fats, which is 10 to 20% of your plate. So what you're kind of noticing here is that there is protein and carbs that are making up a large portion. Whereas you're with your healthy fats, they're a little bit lower. So fats are one of the things that I think a lot of people really sort of neglect and kind of struggle with how to incorporate those. But there are many ways that you can do them. And I'll explain a little bit about how I usually include them in my diet to get sufficient amount. So including healthy fats, again, this is 10 to 20% of the plate. So this is going to reduce chronic inflammation. This is going to support hormone production in the body. Fats themselves, healthy fats, really help with, testosterone and things of that nature. Especially if you're a man, you need to focus on getting those healthy fats in your body. It's going to strengthen cellular repair. So, an example of these is, of course, as far as healthy fats, avocados, olive oil, nuts, seeds, and salmon. So, I mentioned salmon was a big protein source. But salmon is also good with healthy fats because it is, kind of a part of that omega-3 in the fatty fish. So that's why salmon sort of has a good source of healthy fat in it because of that aspect. So like you hear about fish oil, it's the same concept. So salmon has that high amount of the healthy fat in it. So the way that I incorporate healthy fats, I always use olive oil. Like especially like when I'm making grilled chicken, I always include like, use that as kind of like a seasoning. So I'll like season it with olive oil. You could do that you could use olive oil in different ways. I mean, it's a really healthy type of oil. It's not like you're using all the crazy other cooking oils. It's one of the more healthier types. And of course, like your extra virgin olive oil, things of that nature is going to be a good option as well. But that's what I usually do is I'll use it as sort of like a seasoning, especially for chicken. It does really good with chicken. I really like it on chicken. You can also use it in breakfast items if you wanted to. You could add it, as far as like, like with eggs, you could do that as a way, like have it as a, of course, like it's non-stick. A lot of times you just think of olive oil as like a non-stick where they have the spray, but you could use olive oil as kind of like a sort of a, somewhat of a seasoning with eggs, I guess you could say. But you could do that too. Like you can add it in different sort of different meals, is what I'm trying to say. Another thing that I like to do is nuts and seeds. So a lot of times I like the sort of kind of like the trail mix, but not the trail mix that you're thinking of. So what I usually like to get is there is a type of trail mix that has a mix of it's like cranberries, raisins. Sometimes they have mangoes, and then they have, of course, your peanuts, your cashews. Like it's a more healthy sort of trail mix. So it doesn't have anything like it's usually called, I think it's called like a power up trail mix, but it's one of my favorite tops to get. Usually I get like unsalted sort of, tops of trail mix. But if you look for like your more, healthier options, or if you like to, if you like specific tops of nuts and seeds, like pumpkin seeds or walnuts, cashews, you could eat those alone in itself. I actually use those as snacks, and that's a good, source of a healthy fat that you can include. So you could think of that as well. So as we're continuing on here, I do want to break down a little bit on more on how these different points, as far as when we're talking about macros, how they connect. So why does protein repair matter? So again, resistance training creates that micro damage in the muscle fibers. So what protein does is it's supplying amino acids needed to repair and rebuild that stronger tissue. So again, no repair is going to equal no growth. So that's why I'm mentioning, if you don't have sufficient protein in your diet, it's going to affect your, the quality of what you're getting from your training. So recovery quality is going to determine hypertrophy results. So what does keeping muscle protein synthesis elevated mean? So again, muscle protein synthesis is sort of that muscle repair and muscle building process in the body. And this mostly happens post workout. So MPS increases after training and protein intake. So that's why usually after I get done with my, sort of nutrition, or when I finish with nutrition, or I guess done with my workout, what I always include is sort of the healthy sort of protein in my diet. So keep that in mind. The goal is to multiply MPS to spike across the day and not one large dose. So long gaps without protein is going to lead to missed growth opportunities as well. So as we're continuing on here, carbs as a recovery fuel. So carbs are very important as well, as I mentioned. So why do carbs matter for recovery? What they do is they replenish excuse me, they replenish muscle glycogen depleted during training. Again, that glycogen is the energy source that I was mentioning. This is also going to help with lowering cortisol, which is that stress hormone, and any other stress hormone post-workout. It's also going to help support muscle protein synthesis by sparing protein. It's going to improve next session performance when you have quality carbohydrates in your body. That's going to lead to volume intolerance. So without adequate carbs, recovery slows even with high protein intake. What happens when carbs are too low? Flat, heavy training sessions, slower muscle repair. This is going to lead to increased soreness and fatigue, and is going to reduce strength over time. So low glycogen is going to lead to a low output. So another thing you need to keep in mind is healthy fats, of course. Why healthy fats matter is they support testosterone and hormone production. They maintain cell membrane health. Again, they aid in nutrient absorption. So like I mentioned with those vitamins A, D, E, and K, that's what we're talking about, is that those nutrients are helping with that absorption process. It's also going to help with supporting joints and connective tissue health. Hormones also regulate how your body adapts to training fat. intake and helps keep the system working. So what happens when your fats are too low? So again, like we mentioned, fats are roughly 10-20% of your diet as far as it relates to your recovery days. So if you don't have sufficient fats, this is going to lead to decreased energy and motivation. It's going to slow recovery and muscle repair, and is going to lead to hormonal disruption over time. So keep that in mind as well. So going over again to give you an overview on rest day nutrition is that muscle repair continues 24 to 48 hours after training. So again, what you need to think about is getting those sufficient nutrients in your diet post-training. Glycogen restoration supports those upcoming sessions. So again, when you're getting adequate carbohydrates in your diet and getting complex carbs, of course, your healthy carbs, that's going to help. Hormones and connective tissue repair during rest. Again, that's where healthy fats come in. Make sure you're getting those healthy fats. Undereating is going to delay that progress, so you have to make sure that you disperse your nutrients throughout the day. So you don't grow in the gym, you grow between sessions. Keep in mind that some of these common rest day mistakes are common with a lot of people. So skipping meals or cutting calories aggressively. So you can't do that. Again, like what I mentioned, you have to make sure you have a balance in your nutrients. Slashing carbs entirely, you need to still have those carbs in your diet. It's also important to, of course, have proper protein intake throughout the day, so don't have inconsistent protein intake. And it's also important treating rest days as diet days as well. So recovery suffers long before fat loss improves. So be sure to keep that in mind. So another thing you need to be aware of course, your micronutrients and fiber. Like I mentioned, micronutrients are known as your vitamins and minerals, and they help to support muscle repair in the protein synthesis process, energy production, and metabolism. It also helps with immune function and stress resilience, nervous system recovery, which can help a lot with your performance in your workouts. It will also, another thing to keep in mind is that deficiencies don't stop progress overnight. They slow it quietly. So you got to make sure that you have those, quality micronutrients in your diet. So another thing you need to keep in mind is the role of fiber in recovery. So fiber supports digestive health and nutrient absorption. It also leads to a stable blood sugar, gut health and inflammation control, as well as consistent energy levels in the body. So, a healthy gut itself is going to improve how well your body is going to use those fats, or excuse me, use those foods that you eat throughout the day. So, keep that in mind as well. So, that is pretty much all I have for you guys today. I really hope that you found this helpful and valuable, and that this gave you a little bit more insight on sort of understanding your recovery plate and how you need to approach recovery on those rest days because it's going to really have a major impact on the results that you're going to see in workouts. If you do want to find out more information on online fitness coaching, feel free to visit bponlinefitness.com. You can also check out, of course, all of those resources that I mentioned. Again, guys, I do these streams every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I do TikTok streams on TikTok at Brandon SP Fit at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time every Tuesday. So if you're interested in any of those, feel free to let me know, and I can send you the link to those whenever I go live. But once again, guys, I really appreciate your time. I hope that you found this helpful and valuable, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But with all that being said, guys, I will see you guys in the next live stream next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So thank you guys once again for watching.